Oh, okay. Who wants to ring the bell?
We have a bell ringer.
All right, Noelle, go for it.
I'm sorry.
We do not need a glue stick.
Come, come, whoever you are welcome here. No matter your age, your size, the color of your eyes, your hair, your skin, you are welcome here. If you came alone or with others, you are welcome here. No matter whom you love or how you speak or whatever your abilities, you are welcome here. No matter whom you love or how you speak or whatever your abilities, once again, you are welcome here. Whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears in your eyes, you are welcome here. If you come with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands, then you are indeed welcome here. And I apologize, is there some feedback? Is this a little bit loud? It's okay? Okay, great. Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of New Orleans, a congregation gathered in love since 1833 to seek wholeness and work for justice in the world. If you are a visitor today, we invite you to raise your hand so that we can greet you. Visitors. Our worship leader today is longtime member Ann McLean, who has invited several guests today to speak about their personal experiences with the power of unions. And now I'd invite you all to please rise in body or spirit and join me as we read our call to awareness and amends and our chalice lighting. You'll find the call to awareness and amends on the back cover of your hymnal. I'll read the text in regular font if you'll respond with the italicized text. We gather today at a crossroads, the place of many tongues. But we are newcomers to this land. Know that we gather the spoils of colonialism and broken treaties of forced. Acknowledging this history is just the first step. Where we have harmed, where we have taken, where we have disparaged, just as the flame of our chalice, we add life-giving water to earth. Only when we strive to make amends. And please remain as you are as we light the chalice of our heritage, and join me in reading together the words you will find in your order of service, called Honoring Our Labors. In recognition of Labor Day, we light this flame to honor all work, including the work of our hands and our backs, in gratitude for all the labors that support our world and for all those who boldly continue the work of justice, equity, and peace. And please remain as you are for our opening hymn, number 109, as we come marching in the gray hymnal.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'd like to invite the young and young at heart to come forward for a time for all ages. That was- Okay. So the story today is a little bit of my life story and what it was like to grow up in a union family in the South. So who knows what a union is? Adam, can you tell them? like the way they're being treated and it's time for a new talk or agreement, they negotiate. And that means sit down with the bosses and say, we want this, and the bosses usually say no. And then they go back and forth until they finally, hopefully, reach an agreement. But if they don't reach agreement, then they do what's called a strike. And that's when the workers say, well, we're not going to work if you're not going to give us what we want, what we need. And striking means they don't come to work and they walk on what's called a picket line. And they carry signs. There's a lot of that going on college campuses right now. And part of what they talk about in unions is solidarity. Who knows what solidarity means? Adam?
All going the same way.
A bunch of people going together for the same, uniting for the same purpose. And I can give you an example of that from our church because the board recently had a very important vote on which place to recommend for us to go to after we sell this building. And they weren't in 100% agreement, but there was a majority vote for one place. And before they ended that meeting, they said, remember, we speak with one voice. So even the people who weren't real happy about the choice because they chose another place, all spoke with one voice when they presented it to the congregation. They didn't say, well, this is what we voted for, but I disagree, I want this. Solidarity means that everybody works together for one purpose and speaks with one voice. Okay, so back to my childhood. My dad was a member of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union at a refinery in Houston. And of course, as a child, I didn't really know that much about all these details, even what all these words meant. But I knew a few things. I knew we were union. I came to know what a strike was. And the first memory I remember about being a union family was where we grocery shopped. Because we always shopped, and this was back in the 50s when we didn't have all these big chains and big supermarkets. So we shopped at a little family grocery that was not the closest to our house. And my mom explained to me that we did that because they had an account there, a credit account, which meant if my dad went on strike and wasn't earning money, that we could still buy food. Now, he never went on strike that I remember while I was a child, but one of the other plants where a lot of people in my neighborhood worked for went on a very long strike in the early 60s. And the neighbors kind of all rallied together to support those who were out of work. And just to say, sometimes the union pays them a little bit, for walking on the picket lines or something. The unions charge dues and they have money, but it's not the same as working and getting your full salary. And then sometimes they bring in people called scabs. So if the companies don't want to pay what the union members and their current workers want, they'll bring in other people, pay them less, and get them to cross the picket line and come try to do the work that they're not trained or skilled or ready to do. And there have been a lot of clashes over the years between unions on strike and scabs, and some of the music you'll hear earlier reflects that. So the second big memory I have about growing up union was at some point my dad, this was in the later 60s, became a negotiator for his union. So every couple of years, near the end of the year, he would go to Kansas City to negotiate the new contract. So for my family, that was a big deal. Nobody had ever flown before, and he'd grown up in Houston and never been that many places, found a few of the habits of the Midwesterners unusual. But when I turned 15, I got to go with him to Kansas City because my birthday was right when he was going. So I spent my 15th birthday in Kansas City, Missouri with my dad, and I just have a lot of good memories from that, some of which are not G-rated, so I can't talk about them right now. But I watched Funny Girl in a downtown theater and came out with the tears freezing on my cheeks. I saw real snow on the ground that had been there for a while, which was, having grown up in Houston, a pretty big deal. I got to watch color TV. There was a joke that I was collecting the keys from the different men in the negotiating team, because one of them had a good view, one of them had color TV, one of them I babysat for. So I had a wonderful time. And I don't remember growing up that my dad, suffered consequences or negativity or discrimination because of being in a union. That union was pretty strong, and he was there. But in later years, right when I was graduating from high school, there was a development because his company was opening a new plant up in Bellingham, Washington. And Mom and Dad were kind of excited. They thought, well, you can apply and go work up there, teach them a few tricks, and we can live in the beautiful Pacific Northwest instead of hot and humid Houston. So Dad put in for it, and they didn't want him. Most likely because they were afraid he would work to unionize the workforce. And the thing about unions is it goes location by location. So just because there was a strong oil workers union, even in the South, that didn't mean that they wanted one in Bellingham, Washington. So they never got up there, at least not to work. But that's okay. But I grew up having had that background with a strong urge to always fight for the underdog and to never cross a picket line. All right. So the children can either go to the nursery or go back and play in the back.
Ours is a welcoming community where we can find connection, and a spiritual community where we can find meaning. Ours is a sharing community where our joys are amplified, and a caring community where our sorrows are lessened. We take this moment, so once a month on the first Sunday of the month, to share and reflect on our joys and sorrows, and to acknowledge the mutual support of our community. So anyone who would like may please come forward, and you can just make a line to the side right here. And you can take a stone from the basket and release it in the water, either in silence or with a brief expression of a special joy or sorrow. And while we're waiting, I'll go first. I have a special joy today. Today is my 6th anniversary with Melanie Miranda, who's also going to be one of our speakers this afternoon.
We met at church, so we're blessed right here.
I want to share a sorrow this morning. I want to share a sorrow of all of the colonized, those whose lands have been taken. We remember them at the beginning of our services, and we're seeing it today in Palestine. And my heart breaks for the blood that's being shed with my tax money buying the weapons.
I wasn't expecting to come up here this morning until we sang this morning's hymn, Bread and Roses. And it brought to mind a dear friend who passed away some years ago, Cherie LeBlanc. Many of you remember Cherie. And I just want to lift her up this morning, and the memory of her in my life has been a blessing.
Well, I have two things I'd like to share. One is, as Ann was talking, it brought to mind that I spent a lot of time in my graduate work researching the solidarity labor movement in Poland. And I eventually got to go to Poland, which was fabulous. So I got to ask some real Polish people burning questions that I wanted to know the answers to. But I lift up the people who rose to be the solidarity labor movement in Poland, because what they did to fight back against communism at that time was heroic. And also, I have something sad to lift up. Dr. Wade Regas, who was a giant in our area in the real estate industry, passed away last week. Wade was, he started the program at UNO that does an annual forecast of the real estate market in the greater New Orleans area. And he was a master appraiser. But beyond all that, he was just a nice, down-to-earth person. And he's given so much leadership to the local real estate industry, particularly agents and brokers and that kind of thing. So I just want to remember him fondly.
I have a joyful sorrow. I'm wearing my Bemmy button. This is for my good friend Bruce's son, who passed away last year in April. And we wore these at Jazz Fest last year to honor his son. So for Bemmy.
I have a sorrow and a joy that are connected. And the sorrow is the way that my employer, the large university at this in this city, treated and decided to treat students who were protesting in front of the campus, deciding to use ungodly militarized equipment, horses. It was terrifying. When they were peaceful, when they were speaking their voice, willing to be civilly disobedient and understand certainly the consequences of that, but speaking from, I think, a moral heart and a moral center. And it was, in my 24 years there, probably the most dispiriting thing I've seen our administration do. And that's the sorrow. But the joy has been seeing my colleagues across the entire university come together, students coming together to support other students, friends coming together to speak out and call for a place of peace, a place of dialogue, a place of respect, and an understanding and willingness that those things are never easy when the issues are real and when the issues are difficult. And so that gives me joy. It's been a very tiring week, but I love the solidarity that I've seen from among so many people. So thank you.
I have a couple of joys, and one which I'll share. I'm happy to have my daughter move back to New Orleans a few months ago, so glad to have some of the family around.
I have a joy that is actually all of ours to share, and I wanted to let you know that on Friday, in this space, which is so important to all of us, we were able to offer what's called a care center for the students who had been arrested. and in solidarity. So we had, Reverend Sarah Green called me and asked if we could do this, and I said absolutely, and I wrote her back and said, thank you for asking. We are honored to do this, and her answer is the joy that I share with you. It's a good day to be you.
I have a joy, given that it's May Day. The celebration is Tulane's contingent faculty's efforts to unionize, which have kind of been buried under all the student protest, but their courage and standing up for their rights. So,
Hear, hear. So we'll end our time of silence by singing Voice Still and Small. And as we go into our time of silence, may we join together in lifting up those who have spoken, those they have named, and those we hold in our own hearts. And now, if you'll remain as you are, and please join me as we read our responsive reading, To Be of Use, by Marge Piercy. This is found in your gray hymnals, number 567. I'll read the plain text if you'll respond with the italicized text. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who stand in the line and haul in their places, the work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands and crumbles to dust. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used.
Thank you, Jane. Well, I'm pleased to see so many people here on a Jazz Fest Sunday. And I want to give a nod to Cinco de Mayo for people who like to celebrate that appropriated holiday with margaritas and tacos. And there will be plenty of those at Jazz Fest if you're going after. I'm not judging. But today we're going to talk about work and unions, as you might have figured out. And you might be wondering why we're doing that in the beginning of May, and I'll tell you in a minute. But first I want to mention, because as our reading told us, a lot of the work in the world is common, important, but not much valued, at least not with tangible rewards. The most profound book I read in college 50 years ago was called Working by Studs Terkel and included interviews of hundreds of people in all kinds of jobs. And the common theme that I took from it that has stayed with me all these years was a respect for those workers who, even though many of them felt unappreciated and exploited, they took pride in their work, even if it was unpleasant or obnoxious. And there were some very obnoxious jobs in there, including chicken sexing, which you don't want to know about. But they each had a story and a perspective that resonated with me. But the reason we're talking about unions today, and then a little bit about other work, is because in most of the world, May 1st, or tomorrow, which is the first Monday in May, is celebrated as International Workers' Day, or in some countries it's called Labor Day. The US and a few other countries celebrate workers at a different time of year. Here it's in early September. But an amazing number of countries, 183 across all continents except Antarctica, celebrate this day at this time of year with parades, rallies, demonstrations by unions, by workers, in honor of workers. And it's amazing if you look at that list. You know, I looked in my source of knowledge, Wikipedia, and was just astonished at the number of countries, the different countries, some of which I'd never heard of, that celebrate that idea of workers' rights and recognition of all workers. So for our May Day service this year, instead of a maypole dance, we're going to share stories of our members and friends about their experiences with unions and labor organizing. I'm going to briefly introduce them now, and I hope their stories will help you learn more about them. And interestingly, almost all these experiences occurred in the southern US, which is not a friendly place for labor unions. And all of the stories come from women. After these stories, I'll briefly provide some updates at the present and future efforts in more or less detail, depending on how much time we have left. So first, I want to introduce Shafia, who most people know. Shafia Christos Rogers is a member of this church who was raised UU and has worked all her life for social justice, and she'll tell you how that started. The next piece is by Michelle Goodwin, a good friend of mine who is now retired in Costa Rica, but who began, as you'll hear, as a steel worker in East Texas. June Foley is a former member of this church who continues to lead our book club and had some wonderful experiences to share in labor work in New York. And Melody Miranda is a member of our church and a retired teacher who did work in that field. And then we were going to have another speaker, a young man, just to be fair, but he was unable to come, and I'll tell you a little bit about his organization at the end. So our hope is that these stories will remind and inspire all of us to support the ongoing struggles of workers' rights and to oppose the current efforts to further restrict them, creating a better future for all of us.
Thank you, Anne. And hi, everyone. So I was 14 years old. That was about 50-ish years ago. When I first learned from my UU liberal religious, it was called LRY, Liberal Religious Youth, and it was my youth group, and I first learned from them about the United Farm Workers Union. And what I first learned was that it had been the farm workers had been left out of the 1935 National Labor Relations Act. And they had been left out along with domestic workers and restaurant workers. Those three groups had been specifically left out of the act that was meant to create a labor system that took into account the rights of workers. And this had evolved from the actions of movements that had gone on. And these workers were not deemed worthy of those rights. I saw several films in those early days when I was learning about this movement, and one from California and a couple from Florida. And what I learned there was that people in those places lived in less than humane situations where they had to live off of, they lived on lands that were owned by the growers, and had to basically, they had to pay the people who they worked for the money that they earned, and rarely received much compensation by the time the end of the work week was done. So the very people who were picking the food that we were eating weren't really getting enough resources to survive. I soon learned that farm workers had been struggling with growers in California for quite some time, and actually had been working on building a movement since the mid-60s. And they had actually built a movement that had faced down a sweetheart deal with the Teamsters, who signed a union contract with them with the actual intentions of only serving the needs of the growers. So they were actually, this was a sweetheart deal where they came in and busted the farm workers, because this, not only was this a labor struggle, but it was also a racialized struggle, because people who were growing our food in California and Florida were black and brown people. And they were being treated by the Teamsters, who were mostly big, beefy white guys. They were being treated kind of like black and brown people get treated by big, beefy white guys. And that was what was going on at that time. But the organizers who were working with them, Cesar Chavez, who was a very wise person, and Dolores Huerta, and working with others who learned about community organizing and began working with community organizing in their work, and began to build a movement not unlike what was going on in civil rights in the South here. And what evolved by the time I was 14 years old was they were building a boycott. They were boycotting grapes and Gallo wine and iceberg lettuce. And this is what I started to learn about and what I got involved in. The UFW ran this boycott, and I found ways to be a part of it. Began working at that age of 14. I would ride my bicycle home at the age of 14, I was in middle school. So I would ride my bicycle home from middle school. I would get into my union T-shirt, and I would take I would ride my bicycle up to the university center in Tampa, where I lived, and I would table at the university center, where I would talk to people from the university center about getting involved in the boycott and in all of the activities that were going on. I helped to build what would have been called a database, but it was not yet. We didn't yet understand what databases were, but it was a phone tree. I helped to build a lot of other things, and I went to picket lines at the farmers market on Saturday mornings. And during this summer, the second summer, I went and worked full-time at the state office for the Minute Maid contract, where I helped to do the seniority list for the 1,200 workers, because Coca-Cola, who had computers and could have cranked out with one run, could have cranked out a seniority list, but they wouldn't do that for the union. So they made us do it, and we had to hand calculate it. So I spent my summer doing that. And in that time, I lived with people from the union. I was 16 years old, and at that time, I lived with people. I lived with one man who was a former Black Panther, and was very much, and he was the state director and was very much into peace and justice and that work. And I learned other people who were on the staff of the union and who were committed to this kind of work. And it set something in my life that has followed me throughout. That summer that I lived there and learned, it has touched my whole life. And as a young person who today, I live in like I lived in Florida, I lived in a right-to-work state. And it's kind of a misnomer. I think Ann will tell you a little more about that, because what is called here a right-to-work state is not about the right to work. It's about the right to keep unions as small as possible. And this work stirred up my emotions at a time when I was in a lot of emotional pain, and helped me gain an understanding of what other people are going through, and to understand the difference between the privilege that I had and the larger piece of what other people are going through. It gave me perspective, and it made me a stronger Unitarian Universalist. This work helped to build my foundation as a UU.
And in her absence, I'm going to read a brief union story from Ann's friend Michelle Goodwin. My job at 18. As a union organizer for Texas State Employees Union, young workers often asked, "What is the purpose of the union? Why should I join?" My response was always the same. I would tell them that when I got out of high school in 1980, I was able to secure a good union job at a steel mill as a member of the United Steelworkers, Local 4134. As a high school graduate and proud union member, I earned $12.85 an hour, which is about $44 an hour in today's wages, adjusted for inflation, and the same amount as the men I worked next to. I was able to move out of my parents' house and live independently. I even owned 2 cars, one for work and one for show. And I also had good health insurance. That is the power of a strong union. Now, it's been a very long time since most 18-year-olds accomplished that level of earnings. Their ability to earn a living has basically been stolen as union membership has declined in the United States. This is by design. Without workers' organization and solidarity, corporations have been able to keep workers' wages low as CEOs and stock owners' earnings have dramatically increased. The last thing that I point out to young workers is the rising union membership today and the increasing union organizing in this country. I am encouraged by this dawn of a second labor movement in the United States and look forward to seeing younger workers reclaim their fair share of the economy. I believe a strong labor union presence in this country is our path back to a strong middle class. History is the proof, and I welcome it.
I think the purpose of unions is dignity. Dignity for workers that is achieved by balancing the power of administration and corporate offices through our numbers. I worked for 35 years at a small community college in what we call the North Country in New York. And that environment was extremely hostile to the faculty, extremely hostile. They thought that, and I believe them that they really believed this, that it was the unmitigated gall to ask for full-time wages when we only worked 15 hours a week. If you're faculty, you know how silly that is. They thought that we were very uppity, that we thought we should have a voice in the governance of our college. They found us generally reprehensible and outrageous. And in my first year there, the union was in negotiations. And we were, at the time, we couldn't even see the bottom. We were the lowest paid faculty in the state, and we could barely see the bottom from where we were. So we were going to the board to speak to them. It was when we still thought facts and logic would help make a case for ourselves. Big group of us from the union all got in the elevator. And the college's lawyer jumped into the elevator just as the doors were closing. And he faced us, and he yelled at us constantly as the elevator was rising about how uppity we were and about how ridiculous that we wanted such unreasonable wages and the college would never be able to afford it, and pointing his finger particularly into the face of one woman who happened to be standing in the middle. And as the doors opened, she said, "I'm a reporter." So we did very much enjoy it. In that context, I can say that I'm really proud of what we accomplished as a union. We added the adjuncts, the contingent faculty, to our union. We never succumbed to that temptation to give some new workers crummier wages and crummier benefits than the ongoing workers. We created a sick leave bank. We have insurance. I still have retirement insurance in my retirement. We got same-sex couples health insurance way before it was the law. And we got good compensation for online instruction, none of which we could have done without our numbers. Now, the truth is we're still the lowest paid faculty in the state, but you can't have everything. The other part of a union where dignity is preserved is when, for whatever reasons, sometimes justified and sometimes not, administration decides that one person is wrong and bad and awful and must be punished, which they, in my experience, do in a very irrational way. And I had the honor to represent one of my colleagues who had signed on to do extra work. She had facilitated a grant, written and facilitated the grant. And when the grant was closing out, for some reason, the dean decided that she had not done what he needed of her. And he started harassing her on a pretty much a daily basis about it. So finally, she called the union, she called me and said, would you please come and help me? So I called her supervisor and said, I understand these 3 things were her deliverables from the grant. Is that right? Yes. And I understand that these are the 3 things that she produced to meet those demands. Is that right? Yes. So what is the problem? Well, it's complicated. Well, it turned out the complication was the dean didn't like her. And so it felt, well, a long time like I was taking crazy pills, because I had that exact conversation a couple of 100 times over the course. And finally, we went to the meeting together, last meeting, and we went through exactly the same thing all over again. And finally, the dean recognized that with the union there, he couldn't make her do more than she had a deal, it was signed, and he couldn't do it. And so we had the great satisfaction of shaking hands and saying, thank you for your time. We are done here. And my colleague was not harassed on that point ever again. So those are the 2 things. That's the real thing for me, is that what negotiations are, you have to have power to be in a successful negotiation. And the only power workers have is our numbers. So that's all.
I learned to respect unions early in my life. My mother was a big union person. After my daddy died and left her with 6 children to raise, she got a job at the Department of Agriculture as a clerk. She was a great believer in the civil rights movement at the time, and she noticed that the black mailroom workers weren't getting the raises that everyone else was. And they decided to form a union, and they asked her if she would serve as their secretary, which she agreed to. They were successful in forming a union in the mailroom, but my mother had negative repercussions from supporting them, and she did not get the promotion that she was expecting. She eventually appealed to Lindy Boggs, who was our wonderful representative at the time, to help her, and she did get that promotion, and the supervisor was transferred. I was a PE teacher and coach at John Ehret High School most of my career. Early in my career, I was the athletic director and volleyball coach at John Ehret, and as well as a union member in the JFT, Jefferson Federation of Teachers. One of my worst experiences I went through was our union strike, and the slogan was, "Walk the line in 79." Our school board had denied our raises for many years, and that fall, 2,000 teachers walked out. It was a really hard time. Walking with a picket sign in the sun was dreadful. The football team at Ehret had won the state championship the year before, and we decided as coaches, all the men and women that coached would no more sports until the strike was settled. I don't think the volleyball program made much of a threat, but you can't take football away from anything. That we eventually won and got our raise. Later, when I was a PE teacher in elementary school, I was a union representative. This was not a big honor because no one else wanted to do it. Because you had to go into the principal and present grievances, and if they didn't follow the contract, you had to call them on that. And some principals were very good about it, and others were not. Today, the fight for teacher pay and better teacher benefits is right there in front of us in the legislature. And I say, if children are our future, we must invest in those who mentor them. What can we do? You can vote for teachers and schools every time it comes around. It's very important. Thank you.
I know we're running late, and some people have already left for Jazz Fest, and some more of you are pretty ready to. So instead of telling more that I wanted to about present and future efforts, I'm just going to say it's still a battle in the South. And if you want to know about some of the more specific things that are going on, come talk to me after the service. And now we're going to have some wonderful music and the offering, and then you can get out of here and go party and eat tacos and margaritas.
Generosity is a spiritual discipline. We can now practice our art of giving either by placing your offering in the collection plate or by texting GIVE to 504-608-7030.
Is this working better? Yeah. The offertory today is a medley of 3 inspirational union and work songs. And the first and the third are union songs, Union Made and Which Side Are You On? And the second one is a sea shanty. And this may seem like kind of an odd thing for the union, but sea shanties were work songs that sailors would sing to keep their work rhythmic. And the subject matter was often very sort of over the top. But the main thing about it is that it has a nice steady rhythm. So when you were hoisting the sails or pulling in the nets, everybody kept together. So.
Gifts to this community of faith are gratefully received. Let us acknowledge these gifts by reading together the words in your order of service. This gift from the abundance of my life blesses me, our ministries, and the world. Giving in the offering plate and pledging are part of how we steward this congregation. There are countless other ways to serve, build community, and share love with the rest of the city that you can read about in your weekly digest that comes every Friday. Please put your name on the list in the back if you'd like to receive the digest. And one opportunity that will be coming up to steward this congregation is this coming Saturday. There will be a huge packing party. Sorry, it was a bit of a tongue twister. And Beverly will be sending out an email with the details, but I hear there will also be brunch. And now I'd like to ask Ann to give a spotlight announcement.
Yes, I also want to remind everybody that in a little less than 2 weeks, we're going to have a big moving sale, which is where we're going to sell all the things that the church is not going to keep with us or store during our transition. And I need lots of hands and lots of help, particularly the week before, to come and help sort and set up and price items with guidance. So if you haven't signed up, and I know a lot of you have, but I have a clipboard with the sign-up sheets, and we're going to also be putting signs out and social media listings, so whatever you can do to get people here and to help us move this stuff out, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ann. And now, if we could all stand in body or spirit and join in our chalice extinguishing, which is in your order of worship. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And the words to our closing hymn are actually on an insert in your program. The words are really great. I had not really looked at them carefully until just now, so please join together in singing Solidarity Forever.
Through the workers' blood shall run. There can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the fear
you, Jane and choir. May we always be mindful of those who work at every task, including the many whose contributions are devalued, unappreciated, and underpaid. May we support all who work in solidarity to improve the lives of all workers through organizing disparate voices into one strong bargaining unit. Go in peace and work to help them all. You may please greet your neighbor.